Good
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's work. Hello. How about now? Does it work? Hello? Hello? Yes? Okay, yes? Oh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ahmad Karim Nafak. I'm Director of Science Center for Persian Studies at the University of Maryland. And it's my distinct pleasure and high honor to welcome you all here. As you may recall, those of you who have been keeping up with the events of the center, cultural programming, we have made it a tradition to have an event on the occasion of the 8th of March, the International Women's Day. It is very dear and near. It should be worldwide. We know how important women are next to us. But unfortunately, we have a long way to go towards equality between the genders. And we hope that by highlighting certain outstanding women in the arts, in scholarship, in every walk of life, we will begin to prepare the ground, at least in the culture area that is within our mission, to bring them to you and to have them explain to you the challenges, the accomplishments, and various aspects of the art that they perform. 2 years ago, we had 5 women artists talking about themselves and their art. Last year I was on a sabbatical leave, and therefore we had no event. This year we are very, very proud and honored to have 3 distinguished ladies, 2 of whom are squarely in cinematic traditions. Shirin Reshad needs absolutely no introduction at all. She is our pride, the pride of the Iranian American community, and in fact all Iranians inside Iran, except for a few in the elite of the political system. I just learned today that she has also been selected as the Artist of the Decade in this country by Huffington Post. It's impressive to all of us, but when you say it to her, she says, yeah, that's true. And it's really my deep pleasure to have with us Granaz Musavi, who comes to us from halfway around the world and 16 hours of time difference. Maybe it's now 15 or 17. And within a decade, Granaz has moved up into the first rank of Iranian cinematographers, still at the beginning with her documentaries and short films, and in 2009 with a stunning accomplishment in my Tehran for sale, Tehran Man Haraj, which, as you'll see in the conversation, I hope it will come out, has been filmed under extraordinary circumstances, part under the pretext of an academic dissertation, part guerrilla-style filmmaking, handheld cameras, and so on and so forth. We were hoping to have other cinematographers, as distinguished as Golshifteh Farahani and Fatemeh Motamedariya. And I would like to thank Ms. Javid, who is always a friend of the center for many, many years, who tried her best, but of course it was not to be, and times are really tough, especially for avant-garde women on the front rows of the movement of artistic accomplishment in Iran. And people have all kinds of considerations. But we think we have a treasure trove of artistic talent right here in this room. in our three artists. Our third artist, Ms. Ariana Barkishli, is a music scholar, an educator, and a first-rate pianist, and she will be performing towards the end of the program as Ms. Garnaz Musavi switches from an in-conversation session with me to reading her poetry, reciting her poetry, to the accompaniment of Ariana Barkishli's piano playing. I think we have a good 2 hours of high entertainment, very educational, with a solid cultural content for you, and we invite you to relax, forget about tomorrow, which is Monday, and place yourself today, and just take in what goes on. I hope, I anticipate that we're all in for a wonderful treat. Before I go any further, I would like to mention to you a lot of community leaders who really do their best to educate us in various ways. An example is Mr. Feridun Farahanduz, whose magical voice is part of many of our youths back in Iran, and who since we've all moved to exile and the diaspora communities, he has done his best to educate us on Iranian festivals, and today he's offering a CD on Nowruz, which is the new Iranian year, and he tells me that if you play this CD, begin playing this CD an hour before the change of the year, you'll get to see everything, including the old prayers and good wishes that went with the change of the year. And I invite you to take a good look at this CD, and if possible, purchase two, and give one to a friend, if you have one. And the other people here are people who work with a lot of labor of love for Omid Mehdi Foundation, a charity organization based in London and Tehran, and one that educates women who may have been led astray in their youth, educates them, trains them, and does all kinds of good work. Please catch one of the ladies there, Dr. Gohar Farahani or Ms. Farzaneh Javid, and ask for information, and please spread the word on this wonderful charity organization in your circles. It remains for me now at this point to, first of all, congratulate you on the approach of Nowruz. We know how happy those of you who are anchored in Iranian culture are to have this wonderful time, this beautiful festival of spring, which measures in exact terms the moment of the change of the year in Northern Hemisphere from winter to spring. And it provides a wonderful occasion and a world of memories for so many of us who have spent our childhood and youth in Iran, blessed with the coming of Nowruz to our families and homes. I would like to once again thank everyone who has had a hand in organizing this. Oftentimes, I'm seen as the only one, and I get all the credit. I deserve none of it. My colleague, Dr. Nahal Akbari, who is in this hall, has done a ton of work to prepare for this, especially the reception and all the better aspects of this event. Young colleague, technical guru Amir Kashizi, who has worked and is working tirelessly, and a number of others, most importantly Ruzbe Jamshidi, my graduate student, who stands ready to do anything you want him to in order to help. Many of our students, former and current, are here, and I would like to extend a special welcome to them. Thank you very much for being here. And at this point, if I've forgotten anything else, I'll get back to you later. Allow me to invite our featured artists, Ms. Shirin Neshad and Ms. Garnaz Musavi, to join me for an in-conversation session that will run for about 80 minutes, please. Shireen. Welcome, Gurnaz. We thought that we would conduct this as an in-conversation, which is an extended, rather informal exchange between someone who is interested professionally in the arts and those artists who are so accomplished that they can be role models for the rest of us, and especially the younger generation. So this will be an informal exchange of views featuring on one part myself, and on the other hand, our featured artists who will, I hope, will be able to extract from them some of the things that the artists are not always willing to share with others, because they go through such private experiences in the service of producing their art. Feel free to listen in, and if you have any questions, there will be time at the reception time to approach the artist and ask them. But at this time, we would like to have this meeting, this exchange between myself and Shireen and Gurnaz. Shireen Nishad, as I said, is a how do you describe yourself? Should we call you a cinematographer or a visual artist, or how would you define yourself? Please, yes, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to say it's a pleasure to be here. I discovered some family I haven't seen in 30 years in this room. It's really exciting. It's very close friends. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a great honor to be with you in the same room. So what was the question? A cinematographer? No, a cinematographer would be normally the technical person that would hold the camera. If you mean filmmaker, I've never studied photography or film, but I'm basically a photographer and filmmaker and video artist.
What did you study?
Well, I studied painting and I was really bad at it. I went to school at Berkeley, and I remember since childhood I was always drawing and painting, and I thought I had some talent. And then when I arrived to the US and I went to UC Berkeley, I discovered, unfortunately, I had no talent.
So good.
I was really bad at what I thought I was good at. So, pretty much I abandoned making art after I graduated from art school. So I didn't even really make art until 10 years after I had finished my Master's of Fine Arts.
Wow, wonderful. But the lexicon you just used, the vocabulary, is mostly in English. How are you perceived back in Iran with the people whose culture you show? What do they call you?
I don't know. I mean, it's really, I cannot take a credit like a filmmaker like Kiarostami could. People who have studied filmmaking and the skill of filmmaking. And I'm not a photographer in the sense that I'm not really interested in the camera, but the concept for photography. So people call me, I guess, photographer and filmmaker, but I'm really none of those. I'm an artist, and I use mediums to serve me the purpose. I don't really care about definitions or...
Yeah, sure.
So I think people get very confused.
Definitions are important on the one hand because you have to have something, a naming system. But on the other hand, I understand, you have to name and then violate that system of naming. And when you call yourself an artist, time was when the concept of artist referred only to plastic artists, for example, painters and such. On the other hand, there's a more general sense of the artist, anyone who practices any art, any of the ancient arts that humanity has known since the Greeks, or so many proliferations of the same impulses in more modern times. So I suppose that part of the complexity of placing you and positioning in the vocabulary of the arts is, as you say, the nature of what you do. You manipulate your art. In other words, when I was thinking of this, both sides of the camera, I was thinking, you have turned the camera into a mirror. In a sense, you place yourself in front of the camera eventually, as far as the viewer is concerned, whereas you also are behind the camera. And that's what makes it very interesting. And you, between the two positions, you do things. You add calligraphy, for example. You add writing. And so it's a concept that may start as a concept, and it remains as a concept, it remains a concept, but at the same time it gains in so much layering and perplexity, which is what makes it difficult. In a way, it's, it's a lame, maybe a lame system of naming you when people call you a filmmaker or a cinematographer, but that's because you are transgressing all of these borders. You're violating the old classification systems as far as the arts go.
Well, the way I see it is the difference between a poet and a novelist. A poet, I think, writes in much more abstraction. It's a concept. It's full of metaphors. It's an idea. It's emotions. But with a novel, with a film, you're telling a story that has a beginning, a middle, and the end. And therefore, there is not much abstraction. So when I'm making photographs, I'm thinking much more abstractly. But within the same concepts, both in the film and photography, I really think the photographs become these short poems. And then with film, I learned to tell stories. And I think it's a gift to be able to tell a story, but it's a very different skill. Because stories also have to be entertaining. And if you lose your audience, they leave. People are very used to abstraction for poetry, but they're not prepared for abstraction in stories.
Yeah.
They want some coherence. So I think this is the way I have tried to make a film with, for example, Woman Without Name, my work, that tells the story but still maintains an abstraction, and maintains a poetic language.
Yeah. I like the notion, your analogy between poets and novelists on the one hand, and art before you entered and art now that you have become a practitioner of it, in terms of greater abstraction, taking away the fluff, if you will, and leaving some kernel of art, which really makes your work very dense, which is an attribute of poetry. So poeticity is one of those things that you strive for, and you oftentimes come up brilliantly gaining. Now, speaking of poets and novelists, Granaz, let me turn to you. You began as a poet. We were hoping you would continue as a poet because your poetry was good enough for a young kid in her 20s. You have continued that, and you are adamant about continuing it. But now you've added this other dimension, which is it competing or is it complementing the poetry? I know, and I would like to end with you when this session is done, with a notion of poetic cinema that in a way you're working towards. But at this time, I want to see, give me your evolution, transformation, call it what you will, from a true blue poet all around, and then now to a dual character of your art, which is both verbal and visual.
First of all, I wanted to thank you very much for inviting me to this event. It's a great honor for me to be here, and in the presence of you, of course, and Ms. Shireen. It's a great honor for me. With my work, I always wrote poetry. I really don't even remember when I did my first line of poetry, which I thought it was poem. Whatever I wrote, I thought it was poetry. Some of them I have in my childhood while I look at them and really ridiculously childish. But back then, writing for me was always serious. And I think that becoming a filmmaker, I'm still in the beginning of this long road, but trying to be a filmmaker, I think, was sort of inevitable for me because my parents were people in TV and cinema. My mother was a picture operator in TV, and my dad was sound engineer in both TV and film. So I was raised with the filmmakers and camera and sound, basically. But while I was very seriously pursuing poetry in my heart, I loved acting. So I started this career trained as an actor, and I acted as a second role and third role in 2 feature films in Iran. I was acting student of Maestro Hamid Samadarian and Nani Roscoe and your brother too, Dr. Mahmoud Karim Mahmoud for a while. With Marzieh. Marzieh also was in that class in Tehran. And that is how I started. But then gradually I became more interested in storytelling in a poetic manner, not in a 3-act, like, as Nishad mentioned, a sort of conventional storytelling in filmmaking never attracted me as such. I wanted to sort of mingle poetry with filmmaking, bring the aesthetics of poetry into film and vice versa, and still that concept is very much the engagement of my mind. That's what I constantly think about and try to discover ways to import and export between poetry and film. And I think although these 2 mediums, they probably don't look very much alike in the first instance, but as a practitioner, the more that I think about it and I try to write with that mentality or work on scripts or films with that mentality, I realize the connections more and more and how the aesthetics can be transferred between 2 mediums.
Thank you. Staying still with you, do you recall a genesis, a beginning of it, an event, an episode, an action, an anecdote, something in your childhood or youth that you connect, that becomes the first point in your formative process, that the anecdote becomes more than itself now, and you find meaning in it in the sense of making you who you are at this point in your career. Now, I'll ask the same question of you, Shirin, afterwards.
Sure. But I think for me, perhaps it's got 2, it comes from 2 resources. One is perhaps something that is associated with my generation. I think there are a lot of people in my generation that felt necessary to be expressive because I was 4 when the revolution happened, so I'm very much a child of the revolution and the war, the Iran and Iraq war, and back then everything was about motto and slogans, so words were an important part of the upbringing and formation of my generation. And also the language, the expressive language became very critical. The language of expression of daily life of people, which perhaps did not matter a lot before this transformation, before the revolution, and after that, all of a sudden became very important. The language became the carrier of socio-political senses, and the language of media in some aspects was in contrast with everyday language of people. The language itself became the carrier of thoughts, thoughts that were aligned with propaganda, and the thoughts that was trying to forward an alternative to the mentality that was being imposed and compulsory to think within those frameworks. So I think these sort of conflicts and contradictions showed themselves and sort of obliged people, and especially the young generation that was learning from all this, to be very alert and aware of the importance and power of words. So for me, I think, and I think for a lot of people in my generation, that was perhaps very important part of our upbringing and culture that we were raised in. But in my personal life, the stories were read to me before even I learned to read them myself. So my
family, like many other families around that era of revolution, that reading books in Iran became crucial part of a lot of families. So I was no exception. My uncle and my mother, my dad, they read me all Sanad Irani's stories. I sort of could recite them by heart. And Shamlul, for example, poetry was very much read in gatherings at home. So I was raised with stories and poetry. So I think that sort of stayed in my mind, and my mind was sort of sinking somehow all my life with these sort of things, and I got used to it. That is from a personal aspect, what happened to me, I think.
Thank you.
Well, I had a totally opposite experience because I actually didn't grow up in a very cultured family, and I grew up in Azmi.
That's the difference.
Very cultured. No, but I think when I look back and try to understand why I became an artist, and because there is no one, even in remote relatives or family, that was slightly artistic. Not as far as I remember. There are a few people in this room that are related to me. And I don't know where this came from, but it was a false interest in art anyways, because at the time I remember that my interest was art, and I thought I was born with some genius talent or some kind. And then eventually when I became educated, I realized that there is no such a thing, that you're born with this gift. Actually, it's all false. And that my idea was all this interest of the world outside of me. And I became really an artist when I learned to look inside. So there was never, in fact, even through art school, I was never really moved by any particular Eurocentric art historical figures, artists. No one impressed me. I was never idealizing any ideas of artists. And unlike you know, that of course during the revolution, there is a lot of young people highly educated and cultured and etc. For me, I just came and found myself in the school, and I felt empty. And I think that explained why I was such a bad artist. And it was only after I finished school and 10 years I sort of educated myself and I went through certain life experiences, and I went back to Iran. Certain emotions, and I have to say it was deeply personal. It's like my work became an excuse to face myself, my own anxieties, my own fears, my own emotions about the life that I was living and the world as I was experiencing it. So suddenly I had something to say. It was like I had a voice that was not modeled according to some other people's voice, but it was my own voice. And I discovered to me that's what art is. It's like a poet would function, I suppose. It's like you look within, not outside. And so ever since then, my whole idea about how you become an artist and where all these sources and I think it's in your subconscious, but also the life that you live in that feeds that.
That is really fascinating, the way you draw the movement from looking outside, looking inside. That seems to have been a preoccupation of poets before the revolution. In fact, Forough Farrokhzad, last time we were talking about this, Forough Farrokhzad opens her Green Illusion, one of her best poems, with a contrast between Hanjare and Ayene, which gave me the idea of calling your strategy, your technique of placing yourself behind the camera and eventually for the viewer in front of the camera as a way of saying the outside is inside and the way out is the way through. And so I think that's a very interesting maneuver. It creates greater complexity, but also opens the way, and in a way builds on the tradition of looking inside. If you look at the old Sufi poets, they too look inside. And even the outside observation became an occasion for taking them inside. So when Hafiz says, "Mazra'e sabt farak didam و داست من lo," I can say, okay, I saw the same thing too. But then he moves to say, to relate to his own life. "Yadam az kishte khish amad hangam dero." So it's an amazing way of connecting the outside to the inside. And I think I see this most importantly in your first collection of photography, The Women of Allah. I think that was 1990, wasn't it? I think that series of work really was not only your greatest achievement to that date, but also a genuinely new eye brought to the art. And that was the result of your going back to Iran at the same time, right? The traumatic experience it was after, going to Iran was after that. So it was, but I mean, it may have been instigated by that, the experience, the traumatic experience of going to Iran after having been away at the revolution, and you talk about the sea change that the country has made, even the appearance of the people. So, in a way, it's probably a false dichotomy to say that good democratic political conditions create great art, and the dictatorial situations in governments kind of impede the movement of the art, as evidenced by all the achievement of Iranian artists under these horrendous conditions in the country, with this Asghar Farhadi's achievement, for example, in the separation. So I think, in a way, the revolution served, didn't you? Not in a very direct way, but it showed you a side of Iran that you had remained unaware of, and that you now groped for connecting with, right?
I think you're talking about pain, and I think that very often pain and suffering and hard times allow a certain amount of reflection and certain experiences. And without a doubt, when I look back, the first 10 years of my life in this country coincided with the revolution, being distant from my family and finding myself alone in this country and feeling really cut off and just disjointed was really devastating for a young person. I was 17 and I never realized how hard it was. And I think that when I look at my work, and I honestly think when an artist is at work, you don't analyze it like that. Like, it's not a strategy that, oh, now I'm going to do this work because it would really attract the audience. I really honestly think that the most sincere way an artist goes about the practice is to create a dialogue between your inner and outer life. Meaning that your inner crisis and issues that you're dealing with as a single human being on this planet versus the social, political crisis that affects all of us. So ultimately, I think the work becomes that bridge between the product of that relationship between the inner and the outer. And that's the way I view it. Because if you extract me and I make a film that is only sort of informative to you and entertaining, but I extract me as a human being behind this as the artist, and you don't feel the artist in there, there's something missing.
Sure.
And so I feel that everything I have done to this date, whether I'm physically in the work or not, it has some reflection of an experience that was important to me. The question of exile, the question of oppression, the question of loneliness, the question of being an outcast, the question of looking for salvation and security and safety and love, the question of death and loss of loved ones. These are individual and yet, universally global human experiences. So how do we as artists are able to appeal to our audience that touches them in both dimensions, I suppose?
Moving on from the Women of Allah to your other series, the subsequent series of your work. Let's say, for example, the ones in 1999, which is really your Anis Nirav, was a miraculous year in your artistic achievement. I think you did a lot there. Something must have been happening in your life. I think one of the differences that I see between the Women of Allah and the subsequent series before you arrive at filmmaking
is a kind of mellowing of the oppositions. In the Women of Allah, you see beautiful calligraphy with lovely humanitarian messages, and yet that gun in the hand of a chador-clad woman. That's a stark dichotomy. That's a binary. The same binary opposition becomes gradations of difference, which really means, connotes to me the expansion of your view of the art, not just impressing people and affecting them with your art, but also inviting them to contemplate something beyond the ordinary, customary oppositions of man, woman, violence, peace, etc., to grow the sphere and the territories beyond that. I'm sure that had nothing to do with your creative process. Artists don't think in that way. But looking back at it, at Women of Allah and your 1999-2000 work, do you see that?
Yes, I seem to see everything in a form of contradiction, and for that reason, everything I've done sort of projects that sense of opposites: male, female, nature, culture, and woman without men, realism. So both conceptually and in terms of form, it sort of stresses the idea of opposites. And I think part of it is to do with me. A part of me feels very strong, very in control, very grounded. A part of me feels very fragile, very insecure, and very inconfident. Like I think every one of us that walk on this planet, we have an alter ego. We are divided into two beings, the inner and the outer. And I seem to see my characters and the way that I compose my concepts to really insist on that, that juxtaposition between the good and evil, the fragile and the secure, the spiritual and the violent, again, the magic and realism. So I don't seem to see anything outside of this parameter.
That's fascinating. Really, as a way of seeing the growth of the artist, the growth of your vision, I think that what you just said is a seminal statement about what allows you to move on while keeping the basic binaries, but also keep, at the same time striving to make it more and more complicated.
But I might add that this is a woman's week. It's a little bit to do with being a woman. And I'm very happy to be a woman.
Sure.
Because for women, they allow us to be fragile. And there is something about the beauty of accepting, or if you could call it imperfection. I love the fact that I can admit that I'm full of flaws, that I'm very fragile. And I think a man always has to at least pretend that they're really, together.
In my case, it's not research.
I think that kind of duality interests me about being a woman, because when it comes time, we are really tough. But we're not really ashamed of, revealing our...
Kronos, in your case, the equivalent of what we've just been talking about is your movement from a poetry that's anchored in language techniques to a visuality that doesn't negate language, or does it rise above it? Does it still depend on it? It seems as though, to me at least, as though in your more serious and longer works, as evidenced by My Tehran for Sale, you still are pretty much dependent on language, even as you're trying to somehow give it its limited role and allow the voices of the culture. I'm fascinated by the beginning of My Tehran for Sale, because I think two seemingly very beautiful images are presented, which as the film proceeds, they're deconstructed and taken apart. The sound of Azan, for example, the call to pray, that melodic song that is so dear and near to religious people, that really shows shows the spiritual side of Islam. Whereas by the time people have completed seeing your film, nothing remains of that construct. It crumbles in front of them. Tehran, with all its bright lights at night, appears like a wonderful city, but only you have to move into the spaces that your film moves to see how the intestines of that city really counter that impression. So I think, in a way, you're trying to present us languages that you then try to deconstruct or unpack or take away or negate, as you will. Does this have anything to do with your having been a poet or having come to filmmaking from a perspective of a poet?
It's actually a very serious and interesting question to me. Yes, it does. For me, it does. Well, my poetry, then I think the main drive for me to write and to express and to manipulate words and to manipulate language, in order to find a way to poetry and expression that at the same time that, of course, it's a reflection of me as an individual, but at the same time it's a mirror before me as part of a setting, a context that has been very compelling information of my identity because of what I explained before, because of the certain era that I think the crucial part of my life and identity was just getting formed. This crisis of identity, I think, is in the core of my struggle with finding language and shaping it, reshaping it, deconstructing it, and trying to find an alternative to construct it again in a very different way, in a complete patchwork, collage-like, non-linear, chaotic, oniric way, in a way, because that has been my experience. A lost, shattered identity that was lost in a crowd, in a big waves of revolution and war and all that. I'd like to refer to this because for me that has really, that has got very much to do with this sense of identity. So I try to find that identity in the language of expression that is in poetry and in film. That's again what I'm trying to do. I've got stories to tell, yes, but at the same time it's very important for me how I'm telling those stories and in what sort of language, so that language and that way of expression becomes very important because at the same time, not only it's telling that story, the plot, but it's also reflecting on that lost identity, that shattered identity, the search for one's identity that is under attack by a lot of factors from outside and from inside too. So that is how that cinematic language as well as the poetic language the relationship that these two mediums have with one another, for me, that becomes very crucial.
You just took me to فرانسات lines where she says that که شدن راز آن وجود متحدی بود که از حقیقی ذره‌هایش آفتاب به دنیا آمد. The two really are part of the process, the تکه شدن and that unified, wonderful, luminous thing that comes out of it. You are the writer, the director, and the producer of My Tehran Crusade, right?
I'm the writer, director. I basically helped with the logistics of some sort of. I helped the producer as a director might do, but no, I was not a producer.
Okay, thank you for disabusing me of that because I thought you were rich as well as an artist. That's an anomaly right there. As the writer, there are two kinds of scenario writers, script writers, if you will. Ones that just pen some things down, very sketchy, please turn off those annoying phones, ladies and gentlemen. As much as I hate at the beginning to announce this, you have to some. Please, everybody, check your cell phone to make sure that they're turned on. And then there are script writers that really almost come to telling or writing the whole story that then is filmed. What did you do in the case of Martin Hussein?
Again, this sort of, I did not script everything, and I don't think I will do that ever, because that leaving space for improvisation is part of what I like to do in poetry and in film. Actually, at the moment, some sequences in the film that I personally very much like, and I'm attached to them, because when a film is done, usually, I mean, I've done only one feature film, but I have talked to a lot of like filmmakers who take this as a career. Apparently, when a film is done, you really feel detached with it. It's like a living sort of creature. It just does its own course of life and living. But of course, for every artist, you still remain attached to some portions of your artistic production, whether it be poetry or film or novel or whatever. For me, the sequences that I'm still emotionally attached to, they're actually the ones that were not scripted. The ones that happened on the day when we discovered, as we were location hunting, we were doing location hunting, we discovered some location, and that sequence I just wrote in my mind in that very moment. There is a clip that I think we are going to screen, the one that Marzi and Sadat, they're singing on the top of the hill, and Marzi screams. That was not scripted, and a few other sequences too. So I had a very short script, really. Then gradually it sort of, it was built into a longer form film.
Thank you. Shirin, in your case, you inherited a novel, and then you changed it. I don't want to say beyond recognition, but you certainly added things that were a few words only in Shahriz Parsipour's novella, which is historical markers. It was on the 25th day on Mordad of 1332, which is the days of the coup, the famous coup in 1953. And you made a whole dimension of film out of this. And it got to the point where Shahriz Parsipour said, go ahead and do this, but make sure to say that this is your film and not my novel. So how do you account for the creativity that does not come out of the blue, such as Shahriz Parsipour does, but is based on a text? What did you do to the text of, what do you think you did to the text of Shahriz Parsipour's story to make the film that you did make?
Well, first of all, Woman Without Men had to be the most difficult book that anyone could have chosen to be adapted to a screenplay. And that might explain why it took us 6 years to make this film. But it's true that Shahriz wrote that book and built the characters according to how she saw the world and the way that she felt about those ladies, those 5 characters. I always say it's an extension of Shamrouj. I took those women from her and the story from her, and I turned them into who I was and my point of view. And of course, we spent at least 2 years, going over the book with Shamrouj herself, and Shamrouj herself played in the film. I disagreed with her, for example, in the way that she built the life of the woman. I found that they were too catastrophic, too fatal, too negative. The women were too much of a victim at the end. She disagreed. I didn't think that Zarin should marry the gardener, and I don't think that woman should kill her husband. And she really didn't like it that way, but I changed, and she respected that. But the truth is that when you go to a book, there has to be enough arguments for what you like. And I love that book. Again, for that dichotomy of magic realism, for the way in which the woman went in between the city of Tehran and the orchard in Karaj. For me, the orchard became a place like life after death.
Right.
place where it knew no time and place, a place that was beyond Iran, beyond time, you know, as if you went inside of somebody's body and you were in the city of Tehran. It was historical, it was political, and you were very minded of the time. And so everything was really action-oriented. So we, as the artist behind this, exaggerated those things. Again, what Shahroosh created. So in fact, we even built the coup d'etat in the city to exaggerate the timefulness of it. But once you entered the orchard, the camera movement changed. There was silence, there was mist everywhere. Nothing quite made sense. So it wasn't really the real world as you knew it. So, I mean, this was my reinterpretation of her novel. And I think now I've learned that magic realism has to be the most difficult kind of book to make into a film.
It's very difficult, you're right. I sense that while Shahroosh Parsapoor's novel is really an Iranian story, and while you do reflect that in the political aspects of the film, as well as in keeping 4 of the 5 women and highlighting their lives, but ultimately, that your work, your film, really reflects on you as now having become more or less cosmopolitan. You tell a story that is of women, that is of idyllic scenes, paradise if you will, that is life after death. It really becomes more inclusive of all humanity rather than a specifically Iranian work having been written in the Persian language, and for an audience that is involved in or aware of the political movements of that culture. You do reflect that, but at the same time you point to something that is timeless, that is utopic, if you will, and negates the concepts of time and place. Am I right there?
Yes, and I think for both of us who live outside of our country, I think we both understand well the challenge of being an Iranian, but really, for my case, I was even educated here. You're living in the West. Therefore, who are the majority of people who will see your work? How can you make a work that translates and communicates to a variety of the audience? And yet, how can you make a work that relates to your country without compromising the authenticity of the material, both in terms of history and in terms of the cultural intricacy, etc. And that's an incredibly difficult balance to walk. I think in many ways, for Iranian artists living in Iran who make work inside Iran is easy, because in some way they're dealing with one world. But once the work comes outside, you can have a different interpretation, like a separation. It really does have a universal moral effect on people. But nevertheless, it's the work that's deeply rooted in sociological questions of the country. But in my case, I wanted to make art. I am dealing, with the art world that is predominantly Western, and really it expects my work to operate in a way that compares and translates with all other Western artists, that German artists, British artists, not just So, and I also refuse to be falling into that categorization, and yet I feel completely responsible to my own people, my own culture, and I would like to feel that I'm an artist that's expanding on Iranian culture in the truest sense. So, but how do you balance all of this? It's extremely tricky, I think. It remains to be our challenge for those who operate on the outside.
I think in a way, this means probably that film is really doing what Persian poetry of the diaspora has not done. That is, to a large extent, exceptions being very rare, one of them Granaz's work, they do not explore the spaces of exile, the spaces of outside. It is more still nostalgia the return to Damawand and the sunny atmosphere of Iran, which is idealized at the same time, because Damawand can't be seen from Tehran anymore because of the pollution and so on. So it's not a realistic thing, it's an idealized version of what I used to be. It's and you try to instead, or your films try to instead really find ways of connecting your local Iran with all this vast space where Iranians are, in your case, Australia. Which prompts me to ask you, Granaz, you, in a way, you bring your own experiences to the film, in that you too are immigrating from Iran into Australia and had experienced that. Did that enrich the film, or did it give you the satisfaction of working in your own experiences into your film?
I was working on the script for a long time, really, and the script was a compilation of many side stories. So the script formed really gradually throughout years. And myself and people that I knew, I had first-hand experience of knowing them and living with them and having shared experiences with them. All these were very important in this film. So it's very much, I call it a collective autobiography in a way, because I can't really call it my autobiography. But it is lived experiences of real people. I did not, that's why that this film is very confused or confusing between the realm of fiction and documentary. It's in a way both, but that's why that stylistically I try to bring documentary style into the film, whereas the film is fiction. In the end, it's categorized as fiction, but at the same time it has got documentary elements in it because it's coming from characters in the film. They are a compilation of real people. Like Marzieh is not one person. Marzieh is a collection of a few women and a couple of men that I knew. Part of her is me, part of her is herself, part of her is other people. So, and for the rest of the characters too. So, that was really, that is my story. That is the way that I like to tell stories.
I think I know what you're saying, because it gives your film the solidity of personal experience. That Marzieh may be a take on many people, but in the end she is one individual. The other curiosity I have about My Tehran for Sale is your treatment of taboo subjects in Iran. Underground artistic works, AIDS, and so on and so forth. Was that a deliberate effort? I want to say, in the end, hatched on a story that could have done well without them? Or do you think you made it an integral part of your narrative, the story you're telling?
Well, I think the stories of unseen, the untold stories that happen behind walls and behind back doors, underground, they always attract me. I'm more interested in in the dark side of the world that I experience rather than the usual side that is being told and expressed in many ways. The reason, artists, they like to go where it is not really previously discovered or shown. That has been my trigger and challenge and motivation too. So, and I'm interested in the lives of crushed people that are marginal, people that people don't pay attention to, that they exist, but and they are a very important part of our society, like the middle class, educated part of Tehran, urban life. Of course that is important, but for some reason, the stories of these people have been dismissed or not told. So, and I always wondered why, like maybe because they are not exotic enough, because we're so much, like our cinema was, for a long time, was so much invested in sense of exotic images. Well, I personally was not very much interested in that sense, and again, that I find it a little bit Eurocentric way of seeing an Eastern country of Iran, of the land of 1001 Night Stories and so on. I mean, not that beautiful films or pictures, theater, novels, of course, all beautiful, but I wanted to talk about the contemporary urban first-hand lived experiences, and I had to dig out what was happening in underground, in Tehran. Because underground life and underground people, that kind of life is very important part of these people. However, my film is not an underground production itself. We worked with within the frameworks of norms of logistics, permits, and all that, but it is about the underground life of people and marginal characters.
That's really illuminating. The way you, in a way, you're doing compensatory work, completing the picture that comes out of Iran. In your case, Shirin, as you said, women without them was really a difficult thing. I know from the length of time it took you, 2005 to 2009, right? Or maybe even before that. But I saw the first segment of it, and I think it was at Nicola in London in 2005 or 6. And I remember I was taken aback by your depiction of Islam and the namaz, the call to prayers, and the way you portrayed a mosque as a social religious institution, and Zara Nicola, this young woman prostitute who brought back up her straight into this scene. And the contrast was really an amazing feat. It is in Shahruz's narrative, but I think you made it come to life because, as Rana says, it took away all the exoticism away from it, and it brought home to us something like it could have been a prostitute in a Christian country and a church scene. You made it in a way so smooth that it really didn't mean Islam anymore. It meant religion and carnal desire or carnal situations and so on. Was that any part of your plan, or it just came out that way and we're seeing it at the level of reception?
Well, first of all, I have to say that very interesting, because I can say that my film or my work in general in cinema falls into what I would say accented cinema, where, for example, the work that was shot in Iran and really deals with real truth in terms of what happens on the ground in Iran, questions of taboos, etc. Mine is pure fiction, for one thing, and that is accented both by an artist who had been away for so long, who can never have the command of speaking the truth, but also we shot in Morocco, another level of accent, meaning that the cast were majority Arabic, except a few, and so this layering and layering of accents, the physicality and the human interaction of the project. Now, then on top of it, I come from a visual arts background, so for me, from the moment I read Woman Without Men, was one tableau after another tableau after another tableau. And of course, for example, for Shahruz, talking about Zarine the prostitute, she never had in mind an anorexic woman. In fact, I remember the moment that I never told her how skinny she was, and I remember me and her sitting in the balcony in Marrakesh in the hotel, and suddenly Orshi, who was a Hungarian actress who played the prostitute, entered. And I think Shahruz almost had a heart attack. She said she could not believe how skinny this person was. So sure enough, we have changed the script a little bit to fit the body of Orshi, who's this actress, and her suffering. Because for me, Orshi, the Zarine was the most saintly, oddly enough, the prostitute. For me, it was like Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ. It was like the gardener. Zarine back to the mystics and the idea of Sufism, and the most virtuous characters are usually the most sacred, the most spiritual, and the most saintly. And I found, actually, out of all of the characters, that in the most beautiful.
She is the most.
She never spoke, but then, you know, we created this tableau that was the hammam, this beautiful Orientalist painting almost. Normally you would see a naked, voluptuous body as a male, or little boys or a woman, but what you had here was an anorexic woman. And that became a shock, and that sort of subverted every idea you had about idea of Orientalism. So that was all very intentional, to set up this perfect painting and then have a woman bleed, you know. And so they're talking about contradiction. That was absolutely part of the method. But I think for Shams, it was a little bit too far out.
Yeah, I think it was. What Shah didn't have the exposure to, life outside Iran that you and I have been fortunate enough to have. So there you're talking about the dialogue between a localist and a universalist, if you will. And now, Shirin, you're doing something out of this world. I mean, what is the iconic Egyptian diva Kulthum have to do with you and your work? Enlighten us on that.
Like I said, I mean, sometimes I'm really surprised because I take bigger bites than I can chew. And I think with Women Without Men, I have to keep kicking myself, really, are you really sure you want to do this? And yeah, it was like the closest I can compare it to is childbirth. You know, it's like 5 years of pushing. But now with Kulthum, I think most people know who she was. I'm making a first film about her life. It's not a documentary, it's a fiction biography. So in spending a lot of time in Egypt, and it's my very first project outside of the Iranian culture, I feel sad because I feel like I've been kicked out of it. But I think I have been for a long time obsessed with Kulthum as another iconic woman who moved the entire Arab world by her art, by her music. At the time that women weren't shaking the ground so much. And it really contradicts the Western perception about Muslim women. I think selfishly as a woman artist that comes from the Muslim world, I take a great pride in Kulthum. But at the same time, I think there's a political aspect of the story and the way that she was so active politically as a nationalist, as someone who fought hard for the Arab world and the unity and the spirit of the people. She even raised money for the country. And that it allows us to explore the history, the modern history of Egypt. So just what we did with Women Without Men, we revisited the 1953 coup and took people back to Iran in that time. With this film, we went back to 1920s, 1950s, and 1970s. So I'm moving to Cairo for the next 8 months.
That's amazing. So you're doing 3 kinds of historical markers. My father used to say Kulthum did a lot more than Jamal Abdel Nasser to preserve and sustain and perpetuate the myth of Arab unity. And I think it's quite an exaggeration to say that about a singer, but she comes close to fulfilling that. We don't have a figure in the Persian-speaking world comparable to you.
I mean, that's the thing. I really am interested in making films about a singer, because I'm obsessed with music. And many people, Iranian people, criticize me for choosing her instead of Luke or Bush or God knows all these wonderful ladies. But I think the importance of Kulthum is that it expands beyond Egypt. It expands to as young people in Iran, we knew who she was. And the fact that she doesn't fit the description of, she was not beautiful, she never had a family, she never had children, she potentially was gay, nobody talks about it. And yet, it didn't matter. I mean, she was loved by men, by women, by rich, by poor, by religious, non-religious. When she died, 4 million people. It was the second biggest funeral of the Arab world after Nasser. So it's a phenomenon of Arabia. And so for me, I just
agree with you. I think again, it's also a step in your movement towards telling our stories to others and telling the stories of others to us. Because we have managed to remain, by and large, anchored in our own culture, even after 30, 40, maybe 50 years of living outside of Iran. We really do not know. We may know more about, let's say, French singers or American singers, but we don't know many things about Turkish singers, Arab singers, and even our neighborhood. And that's, of course, a function of our upbringing, but I think it's a wonderful thing to bring her to us, especially because she was such an iconic figure, really. So that's your project in progress. Anything else you'd like to say about your future work?
I'm actually working a lot in the Middle East, in Arabic countries. I'm spending a lot of time in Doha and Qatar, making a video there in the desert. I'm also working with Natalie Portman on a
Is
show.
the desert the subject of the film?
Yes, a woman in the desert. Always a woman.
Yeah.
So I'm working on a few shorts, and I'm making photographs. I mean, just trying to keep busy. Yeah. So
Do you anticipate any shorts? Because in terms of practicalities, for me, a teacher of literature, film, etc., was it the last word or the final word? The one that features a paradox-like figure, woman facing a whole wall of women censors and controllers and guardians and minders and so on and so forth. That kind of a thing is much more of a pedagogical reality. It's hard to discuss women without them in a class of 50 minutes or even 75 minutes. But when you have a film of 15, 20, 22 minutes, as in the case of The Last Word, it makes it easy to show the film and have discussions. I think, and I'd like to invite you to think about the possibilities for your films, not just to be, invading Google and hundreds of thousands of people watching it, but of educating us about the topics that you can visualize for us.
yeah, I just want to say, for example, I think you are in between poetry and cinema, and I'm between art and cinema, visual art and cinema. Of course, cinema is art. And so some of the work I do is really, like the one you're about to see is more like video art, and it's really designed for galleries and museums. Therefore, the audience that come have a pretty good grasp of contemporary art, for example. And it's not really possible to do anything that is very narrative or very wordy. But I care about those a lot. Like I said, those become more like poems. And so at the moment, I'm making 2 videos that I think serves that purpose for me. But I'm extremely interested in making movies for general public. And so, for what you're about to see was actually, I made a play. I made a live performance that Mohsen Norju and Shadi Yousefian and Mahmoud Ghaffari were in, and we presented it in New York in last fall. I never directed a play before. It was my very first time. But it was to do with a court, some situation. And I made a 10-minute video that you're about to see.
Sure. We're looking forward to that. And now, yes, there are some clippings coming up that we'll be seeing after we take our seats to watch with you. But let me turn to you eventually, Granat, and rather briefly because we're short of time. You're associating yourself with the concept of poetic cinema. What do you think that is? Isn't all art cinema in a way poetic in that it creates density of images and a condensation of ideas in one space? How's poetic cinema different from, let's say, poetic this or that, acting or architecture or whatever?
This is an extremely broad question to me. I've written my whole thesis trying to answer this question, and in the end, I could not really find an answer. Well, as much as I have understood, and I really like a genre that we can like categorize films for sure within it. It hasn't got the restrictions and definitions, exact definitions of the genre. And it's more about making comparisons and trying to come up with analysis, basically, and finding out and explaining the work of aesthetics. But I think that at the core of it comes narrative. I have to go back to what Mr. Schott was mentioning in the beginning, that poetic cinema, whatever it is, and for whatever length of time that we tend to talk about it, in the end, that is, I think, if we come up with a definition or a loose definition between non-poetic cinema and poetic cinema, I think at the core of it is the matter of narrative. That non-poetic cinema tells stories and is closer to the work of prose, to the aesthetics of prose and novels and stories, whereas poetic cinema, as the name suggests, is more about poetry in contradiction with prose, and the sense of unpredictability and uncertainty, and the loose form, like a liquid or a gas form that can move from one shape to another and resist categorization. So I think, same as like nobody has really found a definition for poetry for sure, it's all like changing. I think poetic cinema is very much like that, but the medium here is cinema.
Thank you very much. Let me wish you both and people like you who are doing their best and really serving the culture in the best possible way, all the luck in the world. We do have a couple of clippings that we would like you to see before we switch to the poetry recitation by Granaz and accompanied by Ariana Bakishli's piano. But I'm told that Ms. Shahla Al-Wabi is here, and I would like to recognize her, please. Ms. Al-Wabi. Internationally recognized painter, and we have the fortune of being about to have an exhibition of her work in our art gallery at this university beginning March the 5th, 14th, is it? It's on. Yeah, March 27th. From 5 to 7, there's going to be an opening reception, and from there on, for a while, her wonderful paintings are going to be on exhibit at this university. We are lucky to have this space to display all kinds of arts coming from the Persian-speaking world, and I'm very proud of all the artists that we've got that really need to be recognized far beyond what they have, the limits that they have to recognize. We'll now, if we may, retire to our seats and have the clippings, and then I'll be back to invite
میخوام 2 تا پیش تو باشه. بهش بگین مدارک منه. دیگه از این مستندتر چی میخواد؟ اینکه یکی از کشور خودش از ریشش از خاکش بکنه بیاد یه جای دیگه این همه معطل شه چی میخواد؟
Aren't these evidences good enough to you that she left her own country behind?
Unfortunately, this footage has no real value in the eyes of the law. You have to be able to prove that you were imprisoned, or that you were hurt, or that your life was in danger. This stuff is just useless.
Enough to go.
ارزش؟ What's valuable in your country? What? من 2 ساله اینجام 2 years. بعضیا 7 ساله. میدونی که من زیاد وقت ندارم.
She says some people are here for 7.
It's up to you if you want to bear with the legal process. If you prefer, we can facilitate to take illegal asylum seekers back to their own country.
نه در مورد از اینکه برگردی به کشورت اگه نمیتونی این شرایط رو تحمل کنی دست ما خلاص.
الان باید جواب بدم.
But you have to decide right now.
No, you don't have to decide now, but that option's available if you prefer.
الان نباید تصمیم بگیری ولی
illuminating lights of Tehran, but as the film unfolds, you see them both being
جزوه تفسیرها رو میگم. تفسیر، کتاب تفسیر. من آن شب سیاهم که از ما خشم کردم، من آن گدای گورم که از شاه خشم کردم. خود 5 و 6 چه باشد زلا خشم کردم، شعرهای پوچ و بیهوده به خدا خشم کردم. استفاده از شعر در جهت ترویج فساد. دایره اتحاد. جایگاه و اهمیت شعر و ادبیات بر کسی پوشیده نیست. شعر هم میتواند در جهت ارتقاء افکار عمومی باشد و هم در جهت انحراف و تخریب آن افکار. شعر باید سازنده و آموزنده باشد. بررسی و تفسیر این شعرها فساد آنها را روشن می‌کند. شرم‌آور است
وز لطفمان یگانه میخوان سوی خانه کردم یکی بهانه از راه خشم کردم زاهن ربای ازل من آهن گریزم وز کهربای عالم من خشم کردم مازرین سرکش از چار پنجاه شش خود پنج و شش باشد زلا خشم کردم این را تو نتانی زیرا برون آری از شهر
Please come in, this audience, please back to seat.
I'm very honored to be part of this program. In this occasion, I would like to dedicate my first piece, Partita number 6, to Miss Simone Begum.
Thank you.